Whenever I get a bag of M&Ms, I love to go for those green ones first. But you know, the brown ones and the red ones, they have feelings too. By the end of this session, we will be able to identify the network blocks commonly used in enterprise design. When we talk about that modular network with the building blocks that we can move around modularly, we tend to talk a lot about the access and distribution and core blocks. But guess what? There are a lot of other blocks out there that we need to pay attention to, and they have feelings too. So in this video, we're going to explore those blocks such as data center, WAN edge, internet, etc., and give us a better idea of how all of these blocks can fit together in an enterprise design. We know and understand that there can be a lot of network blocks connected throughout the network. And these blocks, regardless of what they are, they're typically joined in the middle by a core block. Now, a lot of these other blocks could be distribution layers to other buildings, for example. We might have a lot of different buildings out in our campus environment or remotely connected buildings that are coming in via some other means of connectivity. And these are all going to connect into the core regardless of what their functionality is. So what are some of these other blocks that can connect into the core? Well, one might be the data center. The data center is appropriately named because that's where our data lives. But in addition to our data, it's also where our applications live. So for example, the enterprise applications that keep our business up and running, this is all running in the data center. This is typically running on hardware such as servers and storage. And the network components within the data center are typically more robust than what we'd find outside of the data center. For example, this is where Cisco has their Nexus switches. And also software-defined networking solutions such as application-centric infrastructure, or ACI. The data center is one of my favorite network locations because Cisco has some fun products. For example, their UCS servers, and again, Nexus and ACI. These are fun technologies, and we've got a lot of training on the CBT Nuggets website that go into detail on what makes this data center devices so special. However, as mentioned, the other network blocks have feelings too. And so let's talk about the WAN edge. The WAN edge block, interestingly, is where we might actually see a pair of routers terminating this connection between the WAN and the core. Because typically we're going to see switches at play. For example, these Nexus switches in the data center are actual switches. Again, they're the Nexus switches. And so that connectivity between the data center and the core will be among 4 different switches. 2 switches in the core, 2 switches in the data center. But with the WAN edge, a lot of times we're going to see routers positioned here because the routers are then terminating connections out to various remote offices. And especially in some environments, branches. For example, if your organization is a bank or maybe you're in retail, we might have hundreds of branches coming in, and this is going to require some big beefy routers here to terminate all of those connections. Of course, we want 2 for redundancy, and then those are going to connect again back into the core in a redundant fashion. The WAN edge is going to deploy technologies such as MPLS and BGP. Although the configurations for these should be fairly simple compared to, let's say, if we were a service provider deploying MPLS and BGP, well, we need to know those technologies inside and out. But fortunately, from a network enterprise perspective, there's not a lot we need to worry about. We're not a service provider. We simply need to interface with the service provider's configuration for these technologies. And usually that's just BGP, MPLS. There's very little we have to do, if anything, to interface with an MPLS network. This would also include technologies such as our T1s and E1 lines, our T3 and E3 lines, our DS1s and DS3s. All of these relatively older technologies for extending connectivity out to WAN sites, but these are absolutely in play, especially depending on where in the world you are. In fact, frame relay is still a technology that exists throughout the world, depending on your location. However, in North America and Europe, we don't see a whole lot of frame relay these days. Now, another block we might see is the internet block. Oftentimes what happens with the internet block is we have multiple internet service providers coming in, and typically we like to terminate these on edge routers, just like with the WAN block. And these edge routers are going to interface with firewalls in some way. So now we're bringing firewalls into the equation, usually a pair of them for redundancy as well, and that's going to somehow affect our connectivity into the core layer. For example, maybe the firewalls sit northbound of the routers, connecting between the routers and the internet, but oftentimes they connect southbound. They actually connect between the routers and the core switches. So we have a lot of different options there, and we're not going to drill into the details of all of those in this video, but just understand that typically we're going to find firewalls and routers here in the internet block. Now, the last block we want to talk about today is the network services block. For lack of a better way of describing it, this is kind of where we throw everything that doesn't quite fit anywhere else. For example, wireless LAN controllers might go here. as well as security appliances such as the Identity Services Engine or the ICE solution set. We might see other security devices such as email security and web security, or what Cisco calls the email security appliance and web security appliance. These, by the way, could also be up here in the internet layer, depending on how we want to deploy that within the network. Now, it's possible that we'll see some voice services in here, such as Cisco's Unified Communications Manager, or CUCM. But because this is an application that lives on servers, a lot of times we see this deployed into the data center as well. In fact, a lot of times we see a lot of these different applications deployed within the data center or within other places within the network. For example, wireless LAN controllers can be distributed out to different distribution closets. ICE is like Communications Manager that can go in the data center often, especially since this tends to be virtualized on virtual servers. And so those are usually only inside the data center. And we already mentioned that the email web security appliances can go inside the internet layer. So in a very large enterprise network design, we can expect to see a dedicated network services block connected to the core. However, in many other designs, we're going to find that these services are just distributed throughout the network into other blocks. In the end, the best part about this network design is that we can put whatever blocks we want throughout the network. For example, if we want a WAN block, if we need a data center, we can connect those into the network core. And hey, we might have need for a new network block, whatever that is. Maybe it's a new distribution layer. Maybe it's a redundant data center. Whatever that is, because we've built this network to be modular, we can add a block and connect it into the core. And so we can see how this modular design gives us nearly infinite scalability, so long as the network switches that we've deployed can handle all of the connectivity. And with that, you are now able to identify network blocks commonly used in enterprise design. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.